Hello, I'm Sandy Marecki, and I represent the Republic for the United States of America. We created a video about 3.5 years ago called How to Save America, which I'm calling version 1.0. It was in November of 2022. What I'd like to do with you today is to give you version 2.0. This is 4th of July weekend, actually, 2026. So let's go ahead and talk about how to save America. There is an email here, rrb.admin@republicoftheunitedstates.org, and that is the best way for you to reach us if you have any questions about this video. I will also put that in the very end of the video, so you can write it down then if you decide not to write it here. All right, so here we go. So we have a big problem in America. Hasn't changed much in 3.5 years. Patriots across the nation are trying to figure out how to remove the current corrupt government lawfully and peacefully if possible. The patriots are running for office, trying to replace the corrupt officials with honest officials. But the corrupt government has control of the political parties, the voting machines, the voting systems, so we'll never have fair elections. And lawsuits won't work because the entire judicial system is corrupt. Like I said, not much has changed in this time frame. So how did things get so bad? Well, we the people were asleep. We're starting to wake up, but there's still a lot of people who are still asleep. So, problem. What if I told you that the corruption that we see stems from the fact that the United States is not a constitutional republic anymore? In fact, we hear President Trump talking about it all the time. Restore the republic, right? Our country is a corporation owned by foreign powers called Government of the United States or United States Incorporated or some variety of names throughout time, but always in capital letters. That indicates a corporation. Wait, what? Hopefully some of you are aware of this already. Let me show you the corporate registry on Dun & Bradstreet, which is dnb.com. I will put all of these links under the video so that you can check them out yourself. In fact, I demand that you check them out yourself and see that I'm not lying to you. So back in 2022, I did a search on Government of the United States. And there it is. That is the link. Like I said, I'll put that below the video. In here, it's hard to read. My apologies. It says that the key principal, meaning the CEO, is Joseph R. Biden Jr. 2022, that was true. And the address was 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, and the website was usa.gov. In 2026, we have, of course, an update. We have the key principal is Donald Trump. He is the CEO of the corporation. The address is the White House, and it's usa.gov. Hard to argue with this. Let's take a look at a couple others because the entire government is a set of corporations. So here's the U.S. Department of Defense Corporation from 2022. This was listed as Chuck Hagel, who was actually the Secretary of Defense under Obama from 2013 to 2015. So it's a little bit of a head scratcher why it wasn't changed in 2021. It should be Lloyd Austin. The address is the Pentagon and, of course, defense.gov. So now what is it like today in 2026? Well, it's the first line in the red box. It says doing business as Department of War. Well, we just heard about that they've changed the name from Department of Defense to Department of War. There's a couple of reasons for that. We'll get to maybe later on. Currently, the key principal or CEO of this corporation is Pete Hegseth. That is actually the Department of War Secretary. The address is the Pentagon, the same email. NASA, in 2022, this was their listing. Bill Nelson was the CEO. He was the NASA director at the time under under Biden. The address is NASA headquarters, and it's nasa.gov for the email. Now in 2026, it's still Bill Nelson. That's a little confusing. It should be Jarek Isaacman, because that's who it is now. Same information. Supreme Court Corporation, 2022, it was Chief Justice John Roberts. Makes sense. Address is Supreme Court, supremecourt.gov for the internet. 2026, this is a head scratcher. It says the CEO is Fred Schilling. The address is not the Supreme Court, but it is supremecourt.gov for the internet. Who is Fred Schilling? Well, I had to look it up. It's actually the chief photographer for the Supreme Court. Why is he the CEO of the Supreme Court instead of John Roberts? That's the mystery of the day. So people still doubt this corporation theory, but it can't be any more clear than what's stated in 28 USC 3002, and that's the link, and it hasn't changed. Under paragraph 15, it says United States means a federal corporation. I don't know what else to say there. There is an excellent video, quite long, with a ton more information that I highly recommend that you take a look at. It's called The Corporation Nation, and that's a Rumble link. So again, that will be below the video. So what happened? How did we get here? Well, most of us who studied any history at all know that our founding fathers gave us a constitutional republic, but that was never attempted before in history. The closest thing you would be able to find was in the Bible. So America never was a democracy, never will be a democracy. Our documents never use that word. And our founding fathers despised democracies because they always fail miserably. There's a quote of the day, attributed sometimes to Benjamin Franklin, although it's hard to find any evidence, and it might be a requote. But the quote is, "A democracy is two wolves and a lamb voting on what to have for lunch. A constitutional republic is a well-armed lamb contesting the vote." So, there you go. So, anyone who studied the Constitution, which is fewer and fewer people it seems these days, would know that the original republic has three main branches, the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. And in those branches, the executive is the president, vice president, and a bunch of others, but basically that's that section. Legislative is House and Senate, and the judicial is the Supreme Court and the lower courts. So the president and the vice president would fall under the executive branch. And the vice president, back in the day, was actually the person who came in second in the election, not in the same party. So those positions were filled. Then we had the House, which originally had 65 congressmen. I can't fit that many boxes on my little screen, so we're just going to have to use our great imagination here. So those seats were filled, the original 13 colonies. And in the Senate, there were 26 senators, or 2 per state. Everyone had the same, with my simple animation here. Those seats were filled. And the Supreme Court at the time had 11 Supreme Court justices. Just little history. The Supreme Court has actually varied from 6 to 11 members over the years, but it settled on 9 members in the Act of 1869. The House and Senate, of course, were going to grow over time. As more states entered the Union, they would also get House and Senate representatives. So now we're up to the Civil War time, April of 1861. And states were leaving the Union, and 11 actually had left the Union, leaving only 23 states remaining. There's considerable debate about whether the states could lawfully leave the Union. The perpetual union is the words in the Articles of Confederation. That was actually the government before the Constitution, which failed miserably. And they were replaced by the Constitution. The Constitution says the words "a more perfect union." So that perpetual union was becoming more perfect. Anyway, so let's go back to the simple diagram. So 34 states before the Civil War, 234 congressmen by this time, and 68 senators, with the 9 justices. After the Civil War started, it was down to 23 states with 180 congressmen, 46 senators, and of course the 9 justices. So this is like a proportion of what the stick figures were before. This was called a rump Congress, which means the smaller part remaining. So President Lincoln had a huge problem. Once the states had signed into the Union, they were bound to it and could not leave. But there was nothing explicitly written down. The U.S. Supreme Court did a ruling, Texas versus White, in 1869 after the Civil War ended. And they said that a state could only secede by approval of both the House and Senate, plus ratification by 3/4 of the state legislatures. To accomplish all that is nearly impossible. But in any case, seceding from the Union was considered insurrection. So, in order to preserve the Union, Lincoln had to take some drastic actions. First, he declared martial law wherever fighting was occurring, or in the seceded states, or both. With martial law came the suspension of habeas corpus, which resulted in the suspension of speedy trials for the accused. In other words, someone could be held in prison indefinitely. He also considered the seats of the seceded states vacant, but not deleted and not removed. So it would have been very difficult for the House and or the Senate to have a majority on those bills because the votes would have been abstained. Either yes or no, or there's no vote. No, you abstain your vote. So, in addition, probably most profound, was that he established something called the executive government. That suspended large portions of the Constitution and created a government that was more corporate than republic. His exact words in proclamations, and I'll put those links below, dated the 22nd of September, 1862, and also the 1st of January of 1863, where he uses these terms, executive government, which didn't exist before. So, martial law and executive government were enacted with no vote by the House or the Senate, the states or the people. But Lincoln planned to revert back to the constitutional republic as soon as the war was over and the Union was restored. Well, the Civil War ended, but his assassination occurred only a few days after the end of the war, and so he never had the chance to restore the republic. And the United States has remained a corporation, or at least a corporate structure, ever since. So, going back to our little stick figures again, Lincoln had to create a similar structure to the republic, but in a more corporate form or more corporate aspect, which he called executive government, that did not follow all the aspects of the Constitution. So that's essentially what he did, a cookie cutter, just created another version. And then he just moved everybody over. And so what happened to the republic was basically it was abandoned, but not abolished. The seats were still there, unfilled. Oh, and they also stole the flag. As the southern states came back into the Union, the empty seats were filled, and then new states were added. So, again, with the limitation of my stick figures, I can't really do that here. Use your imagination. All right, so now the U.S. corporation. After Lincoln's assassination, President Johnson took over, and he kept the corporate system, and he was building upon it. He was also a high-level Mason. The 14th Amendment was unlawfully passed by the corporate Congress in 1868 to explain the citizenship of Black men. But instead, it changed citizen of the United States, with a capital C, to U.S. citizen with a little c. Not a big difference, but that enslaved everyone in violation of the Constitution, with no vote and no informing the people. So U.S. citizenship, this new yucky kind, now usurped state citizenship, capital C, for the first time in American history. That was how you were defined. Where are you from? I'm a Virginian. That was what you would say first. And then Virginia's also in America, so you were also an American. But that was second. So what does all this mean? All the people within the United States became slaves to the corporation, and the people were used as collateral on the nation's debt. All the states and counties were required to also become incorporated to have any dealings or funding from the government of the United States Corporation. Congress did not lawfully vote for any of this. Also remember, Congress at the time was a corporation or corporate, so everything after 1860 was extremely suspect, or in other words, doesn't exist. So you're like, no, that can't be possible. Well, let's go back to Dun and Bradstreet. Let's look at state of Colorado, for example. And the governor is Jared Polis, and he's listed here as the CEO of the State of Colorado Corporation. Website and address all match. That was 2022 or 2026. It pretty much hasn't changed. The Secretary of State Corporation for Colorado is Jenna Griswold, still is, 2022 or 26. State of Illinois governor is Pritzker, still is. He's the CEO. And state of Florida, for example, Ron DeSantis. You think he doesn't know that he's a CEO of a corporation? Guys, he knows. He's also a World Economic Forum graduate, as are many of our high-ranking government officials. In other words, not on our side. So, in 1871, the debt of the United States could not be paid back to the international bankers, because of course the bankers are funding both sides of the war. If you don't know it by now, every war is a banker's war. Probably bankers are behind making the war happen to begin with, by whispering in the ears of the people that are eventually going to fight. So the bankers proposed an agreement. Let's make a deal between the Vatican, the City of London. Now, this is not the actual city, but this is the city center, the financial district of London, and the United States District of Columbia, which at the time were the only 3 city-states in the world. These 3 city-states do not actually belong to the land upon which they're sitting. The Vatican is not part of Italy, the city center of London is not part of England, and the United States District of Columbia is not part of the United States. That's just the way it is, guys. And so here's a great link that explains a lot of the history of this, and again, I'll put that below. So, the Act of 1871 made the corporate government the permanent government, residing in that 10-mile square parcel of land known as the District of Columbia. At that time, common law changed to maritime law of the sea. The Constitution did not allow for any of this to happen, and without the authority to do this, Congress actually committed an act of treason against the sovereign inhabitants of the Republic. From what we can tell, it was actually not a lawful vote in the Congress to approve this. So there's 3 parts to the agreement. The Vatican was the CEO of the corporation. The city center of London, the financial district, was the CFO, the financial office, and the United States was the military arm. Well, does it make sense now why the U.S. has been involved in so many endless, useless wars? Who makes money when they fight? The bankers, because they fund both sides. They will always win. So the Constitution of the United States of America, notice the capitalization and not capitalization, that's the way it's written, became all capital letters, Constitution of the United States of America. That is now a corporate document in all capital letters. And that document, that system stole all of our sovereign rights. Benjamin Franklin had given us a stern warning upon leaving Independence Hall when they had finished the Constitution in 1787. Mrs. Powell had asked him, "What have we got, a republic or a monarchy?" And Ben replied, "A republic if you can keep it." And this was recorded in James Henry's diary. So we didn't keep it, guys. We lost it. There's a great summary on the libertybeacon.com, that link. And also a side note, there is a different 13th Amendment than the one we currently have in the Constitution. It was fully ratified in 1819, and included in our Constitution in multiple states up to 1870, thereabouts, and removed illegally and unlawfully. It says bar attorneys, British Accreditation Registry, are not citizens, and they cannot hold any political office because they hold the foreign title Esquire. Now, this is separate from state bar attorneys. It's the American Bar Association or International Bar Association that's going to get you in trouble as soon as you use that foreign title, because you are not allowed to do that, and you become a non-citizen. So what's the impact? Every act of Congress that has British bar attorneys in the mix is unconstitutional. Everything. You thought that was bad? Well, things got worse. So, the Federal Reserve, we all know, the bane of our existence. Conspiracy of rich elites and bankers converged on Jekyll Island, Georgia in 1910. The Creature from Jekyll Island by G. Edward Griffin is an excellent place to start. If you haven't read or listened to the book, audiobook, I highly recommend it. They secretly came up with a plan to enslave the United States with a central bank. They proposed the creation of the Federal Reserve, which would be a separate entity that would take over all monetary obligations. But before this, we didn't have a central bank, because Andrew Jackson, when he was president, got rid of the previous one. So Representative Carter Glass proposed this Federal Reserve bill in Congress in 1913. It supposedly passed. Again, this is a corporation trying to pass a bill. It was signed into law on December 23rd of 1913 by President Woodrow Wilson, who was a self-professed communist. What else happened in like 1914 timeframe? Oh, right, the start of World War I. Not a coincidence, because now we have the rich bankers in control of the country through the Federal Reserve, and they fund all sides of the war. Always. Then came income tax. So in that boiling the frog analogy, all these changes were made slowly over time, so we weren't feeling the heat. The 16th Amendment to the Constitution in 1913 instituted personal income tax. Didn't have that before. The Revenue Act of 1913 lowered the tariff rates from 40% to 26%, but then established a 1% tax on personal income for anyone above $3,000 per year. That was considered a big sum of money. It was only about 3% of the population. They established a corporate tax of 1% on corporations, but this was another act of treason by Congress. The IRS, another bane of our existence, was also started in 1913, banner year. It's called the Board of Internal Revenue, never enacted by Congress. All personal taxes are unconstitutional. They are responsible for collecting unlawful taxes. The IRS is under the Federal Reserve, not the Department of Treasury. This means the tax money goes to the international bankers, not to this country. So in 2022, the Department of Treasury organizational chart, screenshotted at the time, shows Secretary of the Treasury, Deputy Secretary, all various offices and departments. No IRS. So now I'm checking it in 2026, and I have an interesting discovery. There are a couple of extra departments that weren't there before, and I'm going to highlight them. They're basically right here. And they say Office of Investment Security. Investment Security. Could be anything. Could be crypto. Who knows? The other ones are Treasury Executive Office for Asset Forfeiture. Asset forfeiture. That sounds like Executive Order 13818 for election interference. And the other one says Financial Crimes Division, essentially. Financial crimes. I think that's still Executive Order 13818 or a related one. So these are all the things that Derek Johnson talks about. And here's some evidence of that. New departments. Okay, birth certificates. What could be wrong with that, right? Well, 1906 is when birth certificates became required. People were fooled into signing their children into slavery to the federal government. That's essentially what you did, Mom, when you signed that birth certificate. You were the informant. The words that they use on this, we have no idea what they're doing to us. There are two different documents, and it varies by state, so it's even more confusing so that no one can figure this out. The certificate of live birth is basically what most states use, and that means what the parents are given to verify the birth of the child. Okay, born on this day at this time, this hospital, right? The birth certificate, boy, that sounds very similar, was secretly created by the state to make fraudulent corporation with the name of the baby in all capital letters so that you could now be taxed and sued in court. Did anyone knowingly agree to this? Did they explain this to us, that this is what was happening? No, that's fraud. Social Security. 1935, the corporate Congress passed the Social Security Act after the intentional collapse of the stock market in 1929. America was thrust into the Great Depression. While it may have had honorable intentions, the Social Security Act further enslaved the American people by mandating that each worker have a number that tracked them throughout their lifetime. And much more than that, as we know, but let's keep this short. So the bottom line is that we have not had a lawful constitutional republic since the Civil War in 1861. Slowly over time, the corporate United States has defrauded and enslaved the American people. However, there's good news. A group of patriots already figured out what was going on and how to save our republic, and it was already saved. Let's go there. So this group was called the Restore America Plan. In the early 2000s, patriots just like us were already awake to what the corrupt corporate governments were doing to us. This group of patriots were teaching Constitution classes and courses on how to lawfully avoid income taxes and other things. The Restore America Plan had millions of followers in 2008. White hat military. We know about these guys, most of us. How did they start? Most people don't know this part. In the 1960s, around the time of the John F. Kennedy assassination, military generals, both active and retired, realized something was very wrong. They had to do something to stop the corporate crime syndicate that had just murdered the president. Yes, JFK was murdered by his own government. They called themselves the Army of Northern Virginia for security reasons. Today we would call them the White Hat Military or the Good Guy Military. And they came up with a plan over a few decades of how to save America. So it was a two-part plan. The first part was they needed someone to be the president of the corporate crime syndicate, the USA Incorporated, to take down this cabal from within. They recruited Donald Trump sometime in the early 1980s. In 2014, they notified Trump, "Sir, it's time for you to run in the 2016 election." And he did. In the second part of the plan, they needed a lawful civil authority, the actual republic, to be restored by the people. The military refused to become a military dictatorship, because that would violate their oaths to the Constitution. So they actually needed to have a civilian authority. They approached a few of the larger patriot groups, including the Restore America Plan, in November of 2008, just after the Obama election. Their question was, can you restore the republic? They said, we will darn well try. So, The Restore America Plan patriots scoured our founding documents looking for solutions. They realized that the Republic was never abolished, only abandoned. So that meant that we, the people, only needed to re-inhabit the Republic, fill those empty seats. And that's what these patriots did 2 years later, in November of 2010. They knew that they needed to do a grassroots approach, but there really was nothing in the founding documents to help. They were kind of grasping at straws a little bit. Later on, they found a law called 1 Statute 50 from 1789, shortly after the Constitution was ratified, which was the constitutional version of the Northwest Ordinance 1787. That came before the Constitution, and that was under the Articles of Confederation. So both of these things are pretty close to the same. And this was the lawful procedure for a new area of land to become a territory, and then the territory to become a state. How do you fill the government seats? And it was the best guidance available to reseat the abandoned states. So here's a picture of the actual Northwest Ordinance in the archives. It's called Territories Northwest of the Ohio River. Back then, that was the Northwest of the colonies. It outlined the process for acquiring statehood, and it was actually used directly to create 5 of the states. And there's the link. So 1 Statute 50 had to come because the Northwest Ordinance was not under the Constitution. When the Constitution came into play, everything before that time was null and void, gone, including the Articles of Confederation. Don't let anyone trick you into thinking otherwise. And that's why Congress had to bring the Northwest Ordinance under the Constitution, because it would not have been valid otherwise. So that happened on the 7th of August of 1789. It was signed by President George Washington, and that link shows you the proof of that. So under this Northwest Ordinance and 1 Statute 50, there's presidential appointments for 8 key positions in the territory. Governor, Secretary of State, 3 justices, 2 senators, and 1 House member. These are interim officials that would serve only until the first elections. And then that would occur after achieving a minimum of 30,000 eligible electors in the state. Now let's put this all together. So, re-inhabiting the Republic, realizing that it was abandoned, not abolished, and they figured out what Lincoln had done, and the seats were just sitting there unfilled since 1861. So patriots started to sign up, and patriots started to fill those seats. And slowly those seats were getting filled. So the Republic was meeting regularly in 2010, and they sent notices to all levels of government that the corporate politicians needed to return to a republic form of government or else step down, and then be replaced with the lawful constitutional republic representatives from the re-inhabited republic. Well, yeah, they ignored that. That's why we're still here. Now, November of 2010, just a few months later, the re-inhabited states of the Republic realized that they might actually have the required quorum of states to re-inhabit the country at the national level. They hadn't done that yet. On November 14th of 2010, in Ephraim, Utah, the required quorum of states signed what was known as the Declaration of Sovereign Intent. That was the intent to re-inhabit the national level of government of the Republic. And these Republic representatives had selected their first president, not the electoral process, so more like an appointed president. And that was official. The Republic was now back. So now the corporation had hijacked the American flag, the normal one with the stars and stripes and rows. So the Republic Congress had to find another flag, because that's what you do when you're a country and a government. So they went through the original documents for the flag designs, and of course Betsy Ross' flag was in a circle. So why not arrange those 50 stars in a circle? So the 13 stripes are red and white as usual, but the blue field has the stars in a circle. That is the Republic's flag. So in April of 2012, representatives from the Republic filed the Declaration of Sovereign Intent that we talked about from November of 2010, and an additional document called the Proclamation of Claim and Interest that was created in 2012. And those documents were filed at The Hague, the International Court of The Hague, the United Nations, the Universal Postal Union, the Committee of 300, and the U.S. Corporate Joint Chiefs of Staff. That's what was required for reestablishing the lawful status of the Reinhabited Republic. All done with documentation. Yes, in reality, there are two parallel governments at the same time. One de jure, meaning lawful, and one de facto, technically meaning legal, but we would say illegal and unlawful. And so the corporation is what we see as our government today, using our flag with the stars and rows. And the Reinhabited Republic, same structure for the most part, with a new flag. And that's how we've been operating since 2010. Why have you not heard about any of this before? Well, at the time, 2010, 2012, Obama was the president of the corporate United States. And the harassment of the members of the Republic began. Intense shadow banning, the loss of all social media, interference of every kind for years. Worst thing that could possibly happen, the Republic president at the time was kidnapped, arrested, in September of 2012 and endured a kangaroo court and sent to federal prison. Many officials of the Republic went underground for their safety. The harassment had caused many patriots to leave the Republic. But under line of succession, a new president stepped in temporarily, but then realized we really needed to have an election. So the full Electoral College process, President James Buchanan Geiger was elected and still serves to this day because there's no one to replace him. We're still waiting for the White Hats. So what is the Republic's role in the coming transition? Well, what we were told. The White Hat military recruited the patriots that re-inhabited the Republic. The Republic will serve as the interim temporary government as the lawful civil authority, while the military removes the corporate crime syndicate and all of its mafia members. The Republic will be required to hold lawful elections at every level of government, generally understood to be within 120 days of being restored. Free and fair elections only, no machines, only paper ballots. The thing that we've been screaming about since 2020 as a norm. In the meantime, the interim state government will consist of the 8 appointed officials we talked about: the governor, secretary of state, 1 House, 2 Senate, 3 Justice, all appointed under the president's authority of 1 Statute 50. However, the most important is backwards thinking to us. We all have to unlearn what we have learned from Master Yoda. The county assembly is we the people. That is the highest level of government. No kidding. We need to settle the county back on the land, get back into common law, natural law, get out of the water maritime law that they've all pushed us into. The good news on this is that we already have a process we can give you as a template, and it's easy to do. You just do like a checklist. So bottom line is the people are the government, and the county assembly is the highest level. When you're in the Republic, and we return to our original Republic principles, it will be very small government. no income tax on people, only corporations, and no property tax, only sales tax. Guessing, maybe 12%, probably not on food or other essentials. And the thing that we all need to learn is that our rights are not infinite. They end where someone else's rights begin. So liberty is what we're really wanting, which is freedom with morals and ethics. Not just freedom, because that's chaos. That means I can do whatever I want with no restrictions. That's not how a constitutional republic works. So how do you get involved? Join the republic, of course. Never costs a dime to do it. Everything is free because this is your government. Go to the website and register as an elector, and you'll also receive the newsletter. It comes out every Monday. Every American of all ages should sign up at republic4usa.org. republic4usa.org. Connect with your local, with your interim governor, and discuss possible ways on how you can help. The goal, of course, is to restore our republic government and ignore the corporate one. So they'll be in prison. Up until 1789, with the ratification of the Constitution, people in America had state citizenship with a capital C. Once the Union was formed, all people had both state citizenship and American citizenship because the state was part of the United States. Logical. And the state citizenship was always higher than American citizenship. However, the 14th Amendment fraudulently reversed it. So, if you'd like to, probably a good idea, you need to reestablish your state citizen status. Not state national, folks. In your homework, I want you to investigate this. There's state citizen, and there is an organization, it's a ministry actually, hisadvocates.org, as the website shows. State national is actually a trap. It makes you in a worse status than U.S. citizen, depending upon what your paperwork says. And that's not a good place to be. Kind of like being an illegal alien in your own country. State citizen is the way to go. And these folks will talk to you about how to do that. Remember, though, that you do the paperwork. The process and the actions and the learning, that's yours. That's your responsibility. They will help you. So here's your list. Join the Republic on the website we've already talked about. Learn your true history. So there's a set of books called Reinhabited, and they're done 2 volumes by our historian, Jean Pertler, and her husband, David. You can also listen to the Declaration and Proclamation that we talked about, our founding documents. That's on Odyssey, and it's President Geiger's channel. You can also buy a Republic flag. There's a website to do that. And if you fly that at your house, people are going to go, your flag's a little different. And you'll have a chance, opportunity then to explain it to them. 2 books, highly recommend reading, is The Doctrine of Lesser Magistrates. Also The Creature from Jekyll Island, as I've mentioned before. So for more homework and action, when you recruit people, there is a way to possibly challenge them, let's say, to actually do what you're asking. If you say, well, I'll tell you about some stuff, but when you catch up to me, let me know and I'll give you some more. People don't like to be behind. You're planting seeds. That's the most important thing. And that will help to spread the word and make this video go viral. So what's the bottom line? The Reinhabited Republic will be the bridge. That is leaving the corporate crime syndicate corporation and returning to our lawful constitutional republic. After the first republic elections, all the current interim officials in the republic will hand off their duties to the newly elected officials. We don't have any responsibilities except the temporary lawful civil authority until those first elections. We all comprehend that. Also use caution, folks. There are many groups out there that call themselves Republic. They are not the Reinhabited Republic. They are not the same. All right. So if you have any questions, comments, there's that email I mentioned at the beginning, rrb.admin@republicoftheunitedstates.org. It's one of our older email addresses. We'd love to hear from you. God bless you. God bless America.